Welcome to B'madzaje Ginonintwa. This podcast is produced by the Communications Department at the Anishinaabeg Nation. We will be focusing on the issues and initiatives in Anishinaabeg Nation territory. I'm your host, Lisa Abel. With the passage of Bill 5 in Ontario and Bill C5 federally, there have been concerns that fast-tracking infrastructure and resource development projects may weaken environmental protections, consultation processes, and recognition of First Nation rights. On this episode of B'madzaje Ginonintwa, we'll hear from Jenny Lou Campbell about some of the tools and resources that can help First Nations become proactive in the face of increased mining development in their territories. Jenny Lou Campbell is Anishinaabe and a proud member of Serpent River First Nation. She has worked in the mining sector for most of her career, starting as a university summer student and working her way up in the industry from survey technician to mine planner and estimator, both as a proponent and a consultant. The last time we had Jenny Lou on the podcast, she was the Anishinaabeg Nation's mining policy analyst. She is now the executive director of the new Indigenous Centre of Excellence for Mineral Development, also known as ICE-MD, where she is dedicated to advancing Indigenous participation and bolstering the natural, technical, and financial capabilities of First Nations in the mineral development and mining sector. This October, Jenny Lou will be presenting at the Anishinaabeg Nation Economic Development Opportunities Forum, ANEDO for short. ANEDO is a space for business owners, economic development officers, and government and industry representatives to share best practices, learn about industry trends, and develop key contacts within the various sectors of the economy. Jenny Lou looks forward to having conversations at ANEDO about how ICE-MD can support First Nations to learn more about and prepare for participation in the mining industry by offering a one-stop shop for information, tools, technical resources, and training, by directing research by and for First Nations, and by providing referral and liaison services. Jenny Lou hopes that the Indigenous Centre of Excellence for Mineral Development will help First Nations economic development officers, entrepreneurs, and community leaders be informed and supported when considering mining on their territories, and also assist mining proponents in building respectful and trusting relationships with First Nations partners. Miigwech, Jenny Lou Campbell, for joining us here on B'madzaje Ginonintwa. It's great to welcome you back to the podcast.
Ani, thank you for having me. Miigwech. Yeah, we were just talking about how I believe I was one of your first podcast interviewees a couple years ago. So definitely a full circle moment to come back and continue the conversation.
Yes, miigwech. We did have a great chat last year about mining in Anishinaabeg Nation communities. And at the time, you were the mining policy analyst with our Lands and Resources Department. So just to refresh our listeners, would you like to share a little bit about yourself and a little update on where you are now?
Absolutely. So I'll start with an introduction. Ani Bojo, Jenny Lou Campbell, Anishinaabeg, Ganapajina Donjaba, Anishinaabe Kwe and Dow. I'm Jenny Lou Campbell. I'm an Anishinaabe and a proud member of Serpent River First Nation. I grew up in two mining towns along the north shore of Lake Huron and then Lake Superior, so Elliott Lake and Marathon, and also a graduate of Sioux College and Lakehead University. So I'm very proud to have been born, raised, educated, and now employed in our beautiful territory. And I guess to even step it back a little bit further, my path into mining in the mining sector really started quite early and by accident when I spent 6 summers working at a gold mine while I was attending post-secondary education. That was kind of my summer job in between going to school. And I think that's where my interest in mining and mineral development really started. So after I graduated, I then pursued my career in mining and moved up to northern Manitoba and worked in the mines engineering department underground in a nickel mine there. So moved from gold to nickel, was born in a uranium mine. So I always love to recognize the importance of the minerals themselves. But eventually, about 8 years ago now, I moved back home to Ontario and settled here in Sudbury, where I then transitioned into working for an engineering firm and got to work on a lot of the project development work that goes on before a project goes into operation. And then, as you mentioned, I transitioned from that role into the policy analyst in the Lands and Resources Department, where I spent 3 years, and it was like probably the 3 best years of my career. Was really sad to leave, but know that, when go away, one gives an Anishinaabe, one Anishinaabe family, I'm always going to be a part of the organization. And so earlier this year, I did make another transition into my current role as the executive director at ICMD. So that's short for the Indigenous Center of Excellence for Mineral Development. And it is quite a mouthful, so I will just continue to refer to it as ICMD or ICMD. So yeah, that's a little bit of my background now, kind of my journey from being, the boots on the ground, kind of in operations to a policy role. So that's really shaped, I guess, my passion around ensuring that First Nations have a strong voice and capacity and a meaningful influence in how mining and resource development happens across our territories and on our lands. Because I do recognize for so long our voices were excluded from these spaces. But that's really changing, and we're now starting to see a growing presence of First Nations across all areas of the industry, not just operators anymore, moving into technical roles, advisors, entrepreneurs, bidding on some of these large projects. So it's a really exciting time, but also recognizing that there's a lot of other pressures that we're dealing with in regards to legislation and the regulations that we've seen come down the pipeline, I guess, this past year. So it's really exciting, I guess, to help build the future. So First Nations aren't just, present and participating in the industry, but really leading it and innovating, being innovators in that space as well.
Wow, so that's supporting a really new position for First Nations in mining, different than it had been in the past. Can you tell me about how this organization, the Indigenous Center of Excellence for Mineral Development, how did this organization get started?
I guess if you really go back to the beginning of it, it was kind of an action item out of a Wabatek strategy, the Aboriginal mining strategy, to develop, a center of excellence or kind of like a clearinghouse of information where First Nations and communities could go to, I guess, gather and where's the starting place for a lot of this information, especially information that's changing so quickly, whether when you're looking at it from a technical standpoint, a legislative or regulatory landscape. You might have to go and talk to 20 different people and gather, 100 different types of data sets. So I think it was really recognized that there needed to be kind of like a clearinghouse, a single window approach to where First Nations, as well as industry and government, can come to look for that information and start to have those conversations. So it began about 10 years ago from that Aboriginal mining strategy developed by Wabatek. So then a business plan was developed and looking for partnerships with industry and government. So I think that's where a lot of the work really began in 2018-ish. And then a little something called the pandemic happened. And I think, with a lot of, not just within our communities, but just any sector, things kind of went on a standstill or slowed down. So it was really rejuvenated post-COVID, post-pandemic, recruiting me to now come in and lead the organization and kind of start getting those wheels moving forward to build up the 3 pillars that we're centered around, which is the first one is access to information, research, and databases. The second pillar is around developing tools, the technical resources, and the training and the research that our communities are going to be needing to participate in the industry. And third is referral and liaison services. So these 3 pillars were really recognized in the beginning as starting points or areas to focus on to increase our participation in the mineral development industry.
Do you already have a team working with you, or you're starting to kind of develop a team that's working on all these three pillars?
Yeah, so currently it's just myself and our board of directors, which is comprised of representatives from First Nations leadership, industry, as well as research institutions. So we're supported by our partners, which include FedNor, Natural Resources Canada, Rio Tinto, as well as Laurentian University's Goodman School of Mines. And those are my guiding lights at the moment, as we're building up this organization and building my own capacity too.
Definitely that partnership with a university like Laurentian that has this kind of expertise in mining. How do you find that's going to help the organization?
Absolutely. I think, first of all, it's going to give us that physical presence because we're going to have an office located on campus. So it'll be nice to have that exposure and opportunity to interact with the students and help maybe spark that fire in somebody else that might want to go into mining, whether it's engineering or a business role. So I think that's going to be really exciting in the educational space, but also building on a lot of the tools that they've developed. The Goodman School of Mines offers some 101 courses and certifications. So really looking and building on what's existing out there. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel when it comes to a lot of this stuff. So it's going to be pulling toolkits and how-tos from other organizations that are out there. Because again, it can be very overwhelming when you're looking for, maybe a toolkit on impact benefit agreements, IBAs, or procurement strategies, communication strategies. Like all of these things are needed for communities and businesses.
Yeah, that's good. And then I guess the other part of partnering with the university is the importance of integrating Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous knowing into these academic environments as well, right?
Absolutely. And I think it can go even further than that and within the industry itself. Educating the mining industry on what our protocols are, what our culture entails. And it's even going further back. And, I'll often talk to individuals and just almost as a reminder that pre-contact, we were miners and minerals were very important to our economies. So I think it's also providing that education maybe to our own people that might have forgotten how important they were to us, how copper is woven into a lot of our stories as well. So we did have that relationship with minerals. These aren't new discoveries. So I think it's really important to have those conversations as well, with obviously education so they can pass on those kinds of stories and teachings as well, but to educate the mining proponents, or developers that might be coming in from other countries and not know the history of Canada and not know the history of our people. So I think that's a very, very important place to start in those conversations, is recognizing that history that we do have with mining and minerals.
So it seems like the organization can be an important touchstone and resource, both for our Indigenous communities, but also the industry, you're saying?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I guess there's those questions out there, right, from industry, some companies who really don't have the knowledge yet on how to be working in partnership with First Nations communities in mining.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, because First Nations are dealing with this overwhelming amount of data that's changing by the second, by the minute. So the same thing's happening on the industry side. So I think that's where the educational piece comes in for them as well, to help move them forward to building those respectful and trusting relationships.
Okay, I think we'll have to talk about Bill 5. I think I'll limit it to Bill 5.
Okay.
So Bill 5 is the Ontario legislation. Bill C5 is the federal legislation. I'm not as familiar with that. Maybe we'll just focus on the Ontario legislation. So, there's been a lot of movement in the mining sector, I guess, as far as this Bill 5 was passed earlier this summer. And the Ontario government was saying it's a way they want to speed up development of new mines. And they said they want to gain more control over this, what they define as a strategic national mineral supply chain. I'm assuming that also includes critical minerals. So what do you think? How can this be impacting First Nations now? Because already there were challenges before Bill 5 came along.
Yeah, I definitely see that these bills and probably subsequent ones were drafted and are moving forward without meaningful early and ongoing consultation with First Nations leaderships and communities. And that's nothing new when you look back to the Building More Mines Act that came before this one, and the critical mineral strategy before that. And then when the electronic staking system was introduced with the Mining Act modernization, we were iterating the same thing that we are right now. We've seen this before, promises of streamlining, which often, I guess, boils down to cutting out our voices in the development of these bills, right? Capacity and consent should not be seen as barriers. They're really the foundation of doing resource development in the right way and in a good way with communities. So we know from experience, when consultation is treated as a checkbox, harm happens. It's costly, it damages trust, and ultimately it does push reconciliation backwards. So I think the message is really simple, and that any laws, regulations, strategies that affect our territories and our people, our lands, and our waters must be shaped with us and not for us. So we need to be the ones with that pen in the hand, writing them right along with the policymakers within government and industry.
Are you seeing those opportunities starting to take place? This process of developing the regulations and the more conversations or consultations already taking place regarding Bill 5?
I think you would probably get a range of responses in regards to if it was meaningful engagement with their communities, because it often feels like it's very quick. And when we're dealing with these bills that could have effects on our rights and our lands, it's something that can't be rushed. But we also need to work towards building our own capacity to really move from being in a reactive state to a proactive state. And I wish there was an easy answer for that one. I think in all areas, whether you're looking at our health, whether you're looking at our education, and when you're looking at economic development too, is the capacity. But I think there's some movement, I guess, forward in a good way with increasing the amount of capital that is going to be available to First Nations to access in developing projects, or capacity building funds for positions like mineral development advisors. So there are some definitely commitments that we're seeing that are supporting us.
If someone was thinking, or a community is thinking, okay, where do we really need to focus our capacity development? What do you think are the most important areas or the most important positions that we need?
Well, I think this is going to be an absolutely amazing plug for the Anishinaabe Nation Economic Blueprint and kind of the revitalization that the department has been doing. So I'm super excited about this relaunch, because it's just building on something that's already been so powerful for our communities. It's a nation-driven roadmap to how to rebuild our economies that's rooted in our rights and our own values. So what really excites me the most is diving into the blueprint and how it can guide my own work in mineral development and mining, building on the recommendations and actions that have been identified in the blueprint, so that when you're looking at building capacity, so the blueprint's calling on every First Nation to make economic development a priority. So when this is foundational, I think that's when you can really see some benefits for mining, when you recognize that it is a really great opportunity. It's also encouraging developing quality management systems and strong financial governance. So I think that really helps First Nations organize themselves and be investment ready for when those partners and opportunities do come along. When you look at prioritizing land use planning and traditional land use studies, I think this just goes to show that when you're looking at mining, it's not just an economic development priority or a lands and resources priority. It intersects everywhere. It intersects our health, our social services. So I think that's where that blueprint is going to be a tool to help communities clearly identify which areas are open development, which ones need to be protected, maybe setting up conditions before project proposals come forward. Again, getting into that proactive state and being able to enter negotiations with government or industry from an informed position of strength. I think is super important to see, that shift in dynamic. Instead of reacting to projects, we're defining those terms up front.
Okay, that makes sense. So definitely when our communities are planning, then it's really making sure we're looking at things from an economic development lens. But then you're saying also making sure that we're aware of how intersectional it is, that the impacts of economic development can have positive and perhaps negative effects on different parts of our communities. And I liked how last time in our last conversation, we had a good talk about GIS, right? Just having this community capacity to access technology to help assess what's on their lands and how their land is being used, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I definitely have to credit Rhonda Gagnon and the Lands and Resources Department for sparking my love for GIS and mapping. I think it's something I really always enjoyed, but moving into that role just really opened my eyes to how important that data and those mapping activities are to your communities, to have, that capacity and that work done so that, we can understand what our answers are going to be when we're approached by communities. A community would have identified a culturally significant site and hopefully has that protected, but maybe has identified some other areas that are open for development. So I think that's where it's really important to have those technological and GIS tools in, because, we're so connected to the land. So of course we need to look at these maps, right? We need to understand the different layers, our trap lines, the waters, and then layer that on top of the industry data and the government data when it comes to land tenure and where these mining claims are popping up and where these major projects are going to be happening. And you really need the maps in order to visualize that and share that information across generations as well, with elders, with the youth, and people that aren't the technicians, aren't the advisors, right? The ones that are just want to be informed from a community level.
So across the board in Anishinaabe Nation communities, for example, how many communities would you say are really accessing GIS and mapping tools and have a good idea, a picture of what's happening on their lands?
I think there is an incredible amount of our communities that are really, championing that, recognizing its importance. And you might have some communities that have 5 people that are able to operate GIS. There might be another community that's just trying to understand, just trying to get access to the software. So that's where the Anishinaabe Nation can come in, and they do offer, hopefully this is still right, we'll have to fact check this with Rhonda. But there is an ArcGIS license available to every single Anishinaabe Nation community, just to be able to log in, see the tools and the data that the Anishinaabe Nation is developing. So they're not starting from scratch. And then they might layer it on to some very community specific data and then pull in some, industry or municipal data that comes in that they need to really work on in their community. So I think that's, one of the building blocks of building that capacity in and around GIS. People are recognizing how important it is in the work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. So you had mentioned, the mining claims, and our last conversation, we did have quite a chat about MLAS.
The Mining Lands Administration System.
So I guess Bill 5 also mentions MLAS. There's some changes they're proposing to suspend MLAS if the government deems it necessary to protect our mineral supply chain. This was promoted as a way to prevent external actors from obtaining access to our minerals. But do you think these changes to MLAS, are they going far enough for First Nations? I think there are other priorities we had. Do you think the changes go far enough?
Definitely not. There was even a report that the Anishinaabe Nation developed a number of years ago when all of these changes were going to be coming, I want to say mid-2010s. It's called Below the Surface. And it highlights, a lot of what our recommendations were at the time when they were about to implement the system. And if you go back and look at that report, I think, a good chunk of those recommendations still stand today, right? I think MLAS is still causing concerns in our community because it happens so fast, because it's just a couple clicks of a mouse and that claim is then taken up. And in some communities that maybe have never had mineral development happen to this level are now seeing this happen. I don't understand how communities are expected to stay on top of things when they're getting 5,000 plus mining claims within their territories. So I think that's really, again, it comes down to capacity, but also continuing to advocate on how it does impact us and potentially our rights.
So this would be an important thing to bring up in these conversations and engagements as the regulations are developed for Bill 5.
Absolutely. I think it's just something that we have to keep continuing to advocate for, bringing forward as a concern for us. Honestly, I don't think MLAS will ever go away, but there may be, some tweaks to it to, maybe how you qualify to be a claim holder or whatnot, right?
Or maybe tweaks in how First Nations are informed that claims have been made on their traditional territories.
Absolutely. And I think that's where we're seeing some stories come out in BC or Yukon, some so-called wins, right? Where the rights are being recognized. Okay, so now how is that going to play out in BC? So just kind of trying to stay on top of different jurisdictions and how maybe we can take some of what they're implementing and apply it here in Ontario.
So you mentioned with your organization, there's also the potential for technical training and research. What are some kind of ideas that are floating around in those areas?
Yeah. Well, that's where I want to hear other people's ideas when it comes to research, like what research needs to be done and led by us, whether it's developing some case studies of our communities, looking at best practices, like I mentioned, what's going on in other jurisdictions and how we could implement maybe some of those recommendations here in Ontario. Also, opportunities to, share knowledge across different regions. I think there's a lot to be learned by community. If we speak to maybe some of the groups out in BC, okay, this is how, we've gotten into a position that, where we're participating in mining in a good way. So how can we take some of those actions and roadmaps that they've developed and start implementing them here in Ontario? But I think there's also a huge number of success stories of how our communities are building relationships with industry. So you look at Atikameksheng and Wandapite in and around Sudbury, right, who have had mining happening in their territories for well over 100 years. So there's some really amazing partnerships and opportunities developing out of that work. And so I think it's, like I said, the three pillars, like being that kind of one-stop shop for, okay, here's the information that is relevant to you to participate in this sector. And then next, okay, well, what's missing? How are we going to build that capacity? That's where the training comes in. That's where the different certifications come in, and trying to just educate people on the different pathways, educational and career pathways that are out there.
Yeah, tell me about some of these pathways. Because if someone's not familiar with the mining industry, what other kind of career opportunities are there?
Mm-hmm. I think that's where there's so much to learn from what mining can offer in regards to a career, because like we often think of, it's you're working underground, you're driving a heavy piece of equipment, you're maybe working shift work, having to fly to a mine, fly in, fly out. But the career opportunities are much more vast. Like we need engineers, you need to have geoscientists, geologists, bookkeepers and accountants, project managers. It goes way beyond just working in the field to, those technical, those advisory roles and management roles, so that maybe we have somebody leading a major project. We need people working for our communities that are dealing with mining industry, but also to have a larger presence of our people within the industry itself, to really allow our perspectives to be incorporated in when they're developing their own internal policies and procedures and priorities.
Right. So that's a lot of opportunities there. So I understand you will be attending ANEDO that's coming up in October. That's our Anishinaabe Nation Economic Development Opportunities Forum. The ability to meet with business owners, economic development officers, government, industry. What kind of conversations do you think you'll be having around your organization and mining at ANEDO this year?
Well, I'm really excited to be attending and to be given the opportunity to put on a bit of a session and share the work that I'm doing at ICMD. I've been attending ANEDO since its inception, since the first one back in the Sioux as an Anishinaabe employee. So excited to still be able to attend, but now as a presenter. So really excited about that, to see everybody. And yeah, I'm going to really, I think, just kind of introduce myself, reintroduce the center, what we talked about today, go maybe more in depth around the pillars and different activities or action items that are happening under each one of those and how they apply to those that will be in attendance. So heavily focused on like the economic development side, the business side, entrepreneurs, and sharing some of the existing tools and resources that we have, but also wanting to learn what they need, what can help them in their roles. Maybe alleviate some of that burden, like, oh, we need this data set, or who can help me out with reviewing this agreement. So it's just really going to be networking, having those conversations, and yeah, I think just sharing what I can offer, but also listening and hearing what's really needed out there, and hearing the amazing success stories as well, and how we continue with building that momentum.
That's good. So I like how this is really important opportunity to help you on your path moving forward and making sure that this ICEMD can really be helping communities.
Exactly. Community developed input is so crucial. I don't want to create something that maybe already exists, or maybe there's something that is already really amazing, but now we want to do a deep dive into implementing it, or building a strategy around, a partnership or a business opportunity. There's no end to the challenges that, I think the economic development officers that are doing a lot of this work are facing and trying to navigate when it comes to either like information gaps. So there might be limited access to up-to-date data on, mining projects or regulations, capacity constraints when you're looking, at maybe a community that has one person that's wearing 10 different hats. They're dealing with energy projects, they're dealing with mining projects. And then on top of it, you've got the short timelines, right? There's often that pressure from industry or government that they want these decisions done quickly, but the need to recognize that our communities need the time to go through, these consultation processes and our own internal processes to make those decisions, as well as the legal and the financial risks that's sometimes associated with project development, right? Sometimes these agreements can be very vague, or feel skewed. And sometimes, you're relying on very expensive external consultants as well. So how can you build that capacity within your community so you're not reliant so much always on consultants? Because in reality, economic development officers are the first point of contact. They're often the bridge between their nation, the government, and industry. So they're expected to do it all.
That's a huge knowledge base that certainly one economic development officer, probably doesn't have.
That's where ICEMD can really come in, and I want to learn how I can support these officers when it comes to what sort of information they're looking at. Are they looking for legal information, technical, regulatory? Are they looking for financial models? What kind of training or tools, like what mining 101 type finance would be something that they'd be interested in, perhaps? Negotiation guides, policy toolkits, maybe referrals to, connecting them with vetted experts, whether it's technical ones, financial ones, legal ones. And then as well, just sharing different opportunities that are out there in regards to procurement, employment, education, and training opportunities. So my goal is really to try to lighten the load for the economic development officers so they don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, a proposal lands on their desk.
Well, is there any other important things we should be discussing, either about Bill 5 or about your organization or mining in general in 2025?
Yeah, I think maybe just like in general, recognizing that, mineral development in the mining sector is one of the largest sources of infrastructure, procurement, and employment spending in Northern Ontario. So for First Nations, this means opportunities in relation to jobs, creating businesses, revenue sharing, and equity ownership. So if we're at that table early and with capacity, then we can really take hold of those opportunities when they're recognized, but also trying to build that education around that. If a community chooses not to participate in a project, that needs to be respected and honored as well. So it goes both ways, right? But there's also information, whether you want to participate or you don't want to participate, that you need to know in regards to, I guess, all the different layers that are happening in your territories. So in regards to, economic pathways in mining, a lot of it comes down to procurement and capacity building. We know that mining operations require millions, if not billions of dollars in goods and services. So supporting First Nations owned companies when they're competing for contracts builds local wealth within our communities. It creates jobs in our communities, and it keeps that value within the community itself, which is really important because I do know that the blueprint looked at economic leakage. So the more that we can be participating in it and keeping that value and wealth within our communities, the better. So working towards that, preparing our local workers for those skilled trades, like we mentioned, with the different educational pathways that are available to them. When we're looking at business partnerships, so the joint ventures, and even spin-off enterprises in the supply chain. So, it might not be something related directly to mining, but there's processing that's required, there's refining that's required, there's transportation to get these products from one spot to another. So there's major opportunities there. And also when we're looking at transferring our knowledge, we can use some of these partnerships and relationships that we've built with the mining sector to build our own internal expertise, whether it's, the law area, engineering, finance, environmental sciences, right? So I think there's a lot of cross knowledge transfer that we can teach them about our values, our culture, our priorities, but also how we can learn from them as well when it comes to those things. So I think economic development mining isn't just about the jobs or the contracts. It's really about building that community wealth as well as our governance capacity.
So this sounds like this organization is very much needed, and a lot of work going forward, but it's going to be an important resource for our First Nation communities. It's amazing. Well, Jenny Lou, I'm wishing you a really nice, productive visit to Anido this year. Some good networking and information sharing. So people attending Anido, they'll be able to see your presentation, and they'll be able to get in touch with you and learn more about your organization. And wishing you all the best in your new position as the Executive Director of the Indigenous Center of Excellence for Mining Development.
Miigwech for having me, and Bamapi.
Miigwech. Miigwech to Jenny Lou Campbell for taking part in the podcast, and to our Anishinaabeg Nation Economic Development Department for supporting this episode. To learn more about the Anishinaabeg Nation Economic Development Opportunities Forum and the Indigenous Center of Excellence for Mineral Development, find the links in the podcast description. This episode includes the tracks Minupumatsawin by Nigel Irwin and Chippewa Travelers, and Washed Away by Wolf Saga, licensed by Nagamo Publishing. Miigwech for listening to Bamadzaje Ginonandwa. Until next time, Bamapi.